As a child, my world was a patchwork of fleeting dreams and small-town simplicity. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood where the nights were blanketed in the hum of crickets and the occasional bark of a restless dog. My parents worked tirelessly to give me opportunities they never had, a lesson in perseverance and sacrifice etched into the fabric of my youth. Summers were spent on dusty ball fields, winters by the fireplace, and every season between filled with whispered hopes of a future larger than this sleepy town could contain. By the time I reached adulthood, I had learned to channel those childhood dreams into determination. College offered me a gateway to the world, but it also brought the clarity that success would not come easy. I juggled part-time jobs while navigating coursework that felt endless. Yet through it all, the memories of my parents' relentless spirit kept me grounded. Meeting Molly during those years felt like destiny. She was the one who seemed to see beyond my ambitions to the person I was trying to become. For weeks, I had been brushing off the weight loss and constant nausea. I figured it was the flu, or maybe something I ate, nothing serious. But when Dr. Bartle called me in, his tone made it clear this wasn't going to be a quick fix. I'd known him for 15 years, long enough to sense when something was wrong. As I sat in his office, I felt a knot in my stomach tighten. "Pancreatic cancer," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm so sorry, Gordon." I stared at him, the words not registering. Cancer? No, that wasn't possible. I didn't feel like someone who had cancer. I felt tired, sure, but not terminal. My mind raced for alternatives. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I just needed some vitamins or a better diet. But the way he looked at me told me there was no mistake. "How long?" I finally asked, my voice barely audible. 6 months, maybe, he said. "We can focus on palliative care to make things as comfortable as possible." 6 months. The words echoed in my head, hollow and surreal. I thought of Molly, of our kids, of all the plans we'd made for retirement, the trips, the quiet mornings together. It felt like a curtain had been pulled back on my life, revealing just how fragile it all was. I left the office, my feet carrying me out to the car, while my mind spun in circles. I couldn't go home, not yet. I wasn't ready to face Molly, to tell her that I was dying. I drove aimlessly, trying to make sense of what had just happened, until I ended up at the parking lot of the Embassy Suites Hotel. It wasn't intentional. I just needed to stop somewhere. That's when I saw it. Molly's Jaguar. The vanity plate was unmistakable. Parked next to it was a familiar Audi with the license plate, Spine Dock. My chest tightened as I realized it belonged to Arnold Frost. Arnold had been Molly's college sweetheart. They were engaged once, long before she met me. He'd moved back to town about a year ago, and now here he was, parked next to my wife's car outside a hotel. I wanted to believe there was some innocent explanation. Maybe they'd run into each other by chance. Maybe this was just a lunch meeting. But deep down, I knew better. I parked far enough away to stay hidden and watched. A few minutes later, Molly came out of the hotel with Arnold. She kissed him, casually like it was second nature, and then got into her car and drove off. I just sat there, numb. There was no explosion of anger, no sobbing or shouting. It was too much to process all at once. My wife, my partner of more than half my life, had just destroyed me. First cancer, now this. I leaned back in my seat, feeling hollow. Eventually, I checked into the hotel. I couldn't go home, not yet. I needed time to think, to sort through the mess that had become my life in the span of a single day. I tried to sleep, but woke up hours later, drenched in sweat. My body felt stiff, my mind heavy. I thought about Molly, about how I'd confront her, but the words never came together. I needed to hear a voice I could trust, someone who still loved me without conditions. So I called my daughter, Amber. We talked for nearly an hour, about nothing in particular, just her life, her work, memories of better times. Toward the end, she asked if I was okay. Her voice was so full of concern that I almost broke down right there, but I managed to reassure her with a lie. After we hung up, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything I'd lose. No grandchildren to spoil, no quiet mornings with Molly, no chance to see how the rest of my life would unfold. I thought about calling my son, but couldn't muster the strength. Instead, I curled up on the bed, still dressed, and let exhaustion take me. That night, I realized that life as I knew it was already over. What came next? I didn't know. All I knew was that everything I'd built, everything I'd counted on, had crumbled in a single devastating day. Around 10 p.m., I woke up, thirsty and disoriented. I drank the water left over from my earlier meal and sent Molly a quick text. Had to leave town for work. Macmillan's business is at risk of shutting down. No cell reception where I'm headed, back in a few days. I checked my phone for any messages from her. There were none. Not a call, not a text. If I'd been in an accident, she wouldn't have known or cared. Resigned, I flipped on ESPN for a bit before going back to bed. At 1 a.m., I woke up feeling oddly rested and unexpectedly hungry. For the first time in weeks, I had an appetite. I ordered breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon, pancakes, and orange juice, and retrieved my laptop from the car. As I ate, I began organizing my thoughts into lists. The first thing I addressed was Riley's Ally, the company that had been in my family for 3 generations. My mother, Sheila Riley, had managed its merger with Allied Financial before her tragic death in a car accident. That merger turned our business into a financial powerhouse, and when she died, I stepped into her role. My wife, Molly, had no connection to the business. Her name wasn't on the paperwork, and she held no stake in it. Looking back, I saw how things had shifted in our lives after the merger. Molly had always been a loving wife and mother, even giving up a promising career to focus on raising our kids. But as our wealth grew, so did her appetite for luxury. At first, the upgrades seemed reasonable: a better school district, a larger car for the family, but the excess soon followed: extravagant furniture, expensive landscaping, and trips we didn't need. Still, Molly had been an incredible mother. She made sacrifices for the kids without complaint, prioritizing their needs above her own. But as the years went by, something changed. She grew more distant, withdrawing from family life and treating time with us as an obligation. I'd made excuses for her, even tried to bridge the gap with vacations and outings. But her absence became glaring. I wondered what she'd been doing all those times she claimed to be busy. After what I saw at the hotel, I had my answer. As I finished my breakfast, I turned my attention to the future. It was clear what I needed to do. First, I'd have the company professionally valued and put it up for sale. Then, I'd sell the house and liquidate every valuable asset. Molly wouldn't see a dime. Everything I owned would be set aside for my children or donated. I started drafting my plan and picked up the phone to make calls. First, I reached out to Craig, an old golf buddy with deep ties in the financial world. Craig had helped a mutual friend, Scott Billings, sell his brokerage firm during a contentious divorce. If anyone could connect me with the right people, it was him. "Craig, it's Gordon. I need a favor. Can you recommend a good firm for valuing a business? And if you've kept in touch with Scott, I'd like the contact information for the people he used." Craig promised to get back to me by the end of the day, and I moved on to my next call. This one was to my doctor. I needed clarity on what to expect as my condition worsened. He provided names of specialists and urged me to prioritize appointments. His concern struck me. It was far more than I'd received from Molly, who still hadn't acknowledged my absence. Finally, I called Carla, my secretary. I instructed her to handle office matters in my absence and assured her I'd check in the next day with details about the auditors. "Call me if anything comes up," I said, though I knew I wouldn't be back in the office anytime soon. By the time I hung up, the outlines of my plan were taking shape. My days were numbered, but I'd use the time I had left to protect what mattered most: my kids, my legacy, and my dignity. As for Molly, she'd have to face the consequences of her choices without me. Running a business like mine demanded reliable security. While the internal team managed routine tasks, they weren't equipped for deeper investigative work. For more complex matters, I relied on an outside security firm known for its expertise in surveillance, background checks, and sensitive cases. I wasn't interested in building a legal case for divorce. What was the point with only 6 months to live? Instead, I needed solid evidence of my wife's actions, primarily for my children. They deserved the truth, so I wouldn't be cast as the villain after I was gone. Uncharacteristically, I decided to meet with the firm in person. Normally, a phone call would have sufficed, especially since I had the CEO's direct number. But something about the situation demanded a physical presence, perhaps a need to reclaim some control. When I arrived at their office, I introduced myself and requested a meeting with Avery Beastel. Despite not having an appointment, he came down promptly and led me into a sleek, modern conference room. I explained the situation plainly. I needed a thorough investigation into my wife's activities, evidence of her current affair, and any past indiscretions. Although Avery maintained a professional demeanor, it was clear he hadn't expected such a direct request. Still, he assured me that his team could handle the matter discreetly and effectively. I signed the necessary authorizations, documents that seemed to encompass an entire forest's worth of paper. Everything was included: surveillance on the cars and house, financial investigations, and even a plan to pressure local hotels for records if needed. I emphasized the urgency. instructing him to prioritize the case and involve additional resources if required. After leaving the office, I received a call from Craig, an old friend and trusted contact. He had found a lead for evaluating my company, Marquette Financial Services, run by Maddie Albright. Known for their meticulous work, Marquette was the perfect choice. Craig had already arranged a meeting for that afternoon, and I made my way to their office. Maddie Albright radiated competence and professionalism. Her office reflected her focus, with framed photos of her family, a husband and 2 children, neatly displayed. We discussed the process of valuing my company, and after signing another stack of authorizations, she assured me her team would begin immediately. When I pressed for speed, she made it clear that while efficiency was possible, quality would not be compromised. Her honesty only strengthened my confidence in her. The day felt productive, but as I drove back to the hotel, my thoughts circled back to the heavy realities I was confronting. My life was finite, with no control over the looming end. But Molly's actions, her betrayal, were something I could manage. In shaping that narrative, I found a strange sense of purpose. Back at the hotel, I leaned against the headboard and made another call. The Veterans Clinic's automated system eventually connected me to Marlene, the receptionist for DACAM. Over the years, I'd grown familiar with her polite but formal tone. She arranged for me to meet ECAM later that evening, not at his office, but over dinner at a local bar and grill. By the time I arrived, ECAM stood out easily. His presence, marked by his distinct Sikh identity, was steadying in its familiarity. As he joined me at the table, the waitress brought over water and chips. For the first time that day, the weight of my decisions felt lighter. Sharing the burden, even in small ways, made all the difference. I sat at the restaurant table, scanning the menu absently, though my mind was elsewhere. The waitress approached with a cheerful, "Ready to order?" I smiled faintly at the irony. Ready? I needed 6 months, maybe a few years, not a menu. She was young, probably a college student, and seemed unaware of the storm in my head. I ordered beers, Uncle Jacob's Stout for me, and an O'Doul's for my friend Ikam, along with 2 bowls of chile verde, 1 vegetarian, and garlic bread. She took the order and left. Ikam, a psychiatrist and an old friend from my service days, studied me with curiosity, his chin resting on his hands. He knew me too well to miss the tension. The restaurant, filled with young couples and families, only amplified the sense that I was out of place, a relic in someone else's vibrant world. When his probing gaze lingered, I finally broke. I recounted everything: the cancer diagnosis, Molly's betrayal, the numbness that had overtaken me, and the strange clarity I'd woken up with that morning. I explained my decision to dismantle her life as methodically as she dismantled my trust. It wasn't revenge for the sake of it. It was a final act of control in a life that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Ikam listened without judgment, his sympathy clear. He reminded me I didn't deserve any of this and urged me to focus on the future, whatever time I had left. Before we parted, he invited me to a fair at the Veterans Clinic that weekend. It seemed small, but the thought of camaraderie gave me something to look forward to. That evening, Molly finally reached out for the first time in 2 days, asking when I'd return. Her timing and detachment made it clear she was only checking to see how much freedom she had left for her affair. I ignored the message and instead called my secretary, Carla, to request access to a file on my computer, a compilation of buyout offers for my company. The file contained years of research, company profiles, and evaluations. With my time running out, I decided to liquidate the business. For the next few hours, I reviewed the data, confirming its accuracy and drafting letters to potential buyers. Each letter included information about the firm I'd hired for the evaluation, Maddie Albright's company, ensuring the process was thorough and professional. By the time the letters were sent, I had put into motion one of the final steps in unraveling the life Molly and I had built together. I also contacted my doctor to confirm the details for palliative care specialists, but insisted that Molly remain completely in the dark about my condition. He tried to argue, claiming secrecy was a mistake, but I made it clear my diagnosis was mine alone to control. By Saturday, most of my assets had been liquidated. The cars, the house, the business, even an apartment in Honolulu were all accounted for. I sent Molly a curt message saying I'd return Wednesday. Her response, a simple "okay," was as empty as our marriage had become. I dressed casually and headed to the Veterans Clinic to meet Ekam. Half the parking lot was taken up by a vibrant festival honoring veterans. There were food vendors, live music, and booths offering services and resources for those who had served. As I wandered through the crowd, I grabbed a mango lassi from a food truck and tipped generously, The Poplin Family Jug Band played in the background, their cheerful tunes a strange contrast to my somber thoughts. One vendor, Mookie's House of Tacos, caught my eye with its quirky signage. A giant notice declared they didn't sell Dr. Pepper, while a smaller menu detailed their tacos and salsas. Mookie himself handed out brown paper bags with a warm smile, occasionally hugging those who stopped by. The festival was lively, filled with energy and camaraderie, but it only underscored how isolated I felt. As I stood there, sipping my drink, and watching the scene unfold, I realized how much I'd come to depend on these small moments of connection, brief respites in a world that was rapidly unraveling. For now, they would have to be enough. At the Veterans Fair, Ecom explained Mookie's reputation. Mookie was known for giving free cannabis to veterans and the elderly, claiming it was a super strain. While that claim was as common in Colorado as craft breweries, Mookie's generosity set him apart. After sampling his tacos, I bought 6, 2 chicken, 1 carnitas for me, and 2 sofritas and a bean taco for Ecom. I added a few jars of his hemp salsa and left a generous tip, rationalizing it as part of the fortune I'd soon have to shed. As I headed toward the building, a voice called my name. Turning, I saw Scott Billings jogging toward me. He looked better than I'd expected, considering the rumors of his post-divorce struggles. We exchanged pleasantries, and he mentioned he'd recently moved back to town to be near his niece and nephew. When the conversation shifted to work, I admitted I was selling my business, and he offered to meet for lunch and share insights from his own experience. Scott's presence reminded me of his ex-wife, Nancy, a former LPGA star. Curious, I made a mental note to look her up later. After parting ways, I returned to Ecam, who was visibly pleased to see the tacos. Over the next 2 hours, we delved into topics I rarely discussed with anyone else, our conversation drifting from life's complexities to the challenges I faced. Ecam, ever the psychiatrist, eventually addressed the elephant in the room, Molly's betrayal. He suggested that I give her a chance to change, to acknowledge her actions and return to the family. He believed reconciliation was possible, that I had nothing to lose by trying. But the idea of sharing my final months with a woman whose betrayal had gutted me was unbearable. I told him plainly that I couldn't do it. The thought of waking up each day beside someone who had shattered my trust, knowing she'd only stayed out of pity or guilt, felt like a slow death. I was resolved to dismantle the life we'd built and leave her to face the ruins. Eckham, though disapproving, understood my anger, even as he cautioned me against letting hatred consume my final days. He urged me to find peace and approach Molly with honesty about both my diagnosis and her infidelity. We both knew I wasn't going to take his advice. Instead, I shifted the focus to my children. How could I prepare them for what was coming? We discussed ways to broach the subject, balancing honesty with sensitivity. By the time I left, the sun had set, and I was emotionally drained. Back at the hotel, I ordered drinks to my room and made a call I had been avoiding. I dialed my son, William, who picked up with his usual cheerfulness. I told him I needed to meet him and his sister the following weekend, assuring him it was about business, though I could tell he wasn't convinced. His concern was palpable as he reminded me I could always call to talk. His words lingered after we hung up, a bittersweet reminder of the love and strength I still had in my children. That night I lay awake, replaying the conversation and steeling myself for what lay ahead. The weight of what I needed to say, to Molly, to my children, felt crushing. But as much as the future terrified me, I knew I couldn't delay much longer. Time was running out. After ending the call with William, I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Memories of his fearless childhood came rushing back. His wild bike rides, the skateboarding tricks that made my heart stop, and the endless trips to skate parks where I insisted he wear helmets and pads. I would have wrapped him in bubble wrap if I could. Now he was grown, independent, and someone I deeply admired. Lost in self-reflection, I decided to make something meaningful for him and his sister. Videos offering life advice for moments I wouldn't be there to guide them through. I planned topics like recognizing true love, overcoming marriage hurdles, and the shock of discovering you're about to be a parent. My focus had narrowed to my children and a few close friends, and with less than 6 months left, I intended to use my time wisely. I toyed with the idea of setting up an irrevocable trust for the kids, untouchable by Molly. If that didn't work, I'd buy gold and arrange for them to receive it in a few years. The anger simmered inside me, but it wasn't helping. I opened the investigator's daily photo summary emails, something I'd avoided until then. The reports were clinical, detached, but the attached pictures struck a raw nerve. They revealed a life I didn't recognize, a sense of loss so profound it hollowed me out. I didn't realize I was crying until the tears rolled down my cheeks. Exhausted, I stripped down to my underwear, crawled into bed, and fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, though not as energized as previous days, I was determined. I had a plan. Sitting at my laptop, I brainstormed ideas for a project that would reflect kindness and simplicity. After sifting through dozens of possibilities, I landed on something lighthearted and universal: hugs. A message about their value felt fitting, uplifting, and easy to scale. The University of Colorado had a strong arts program, so I headed to campus to find freelance graphic artists. Wandering through bulletin boards across campus, I snapped photos of 7 ads from students advertising their services. Feeling accomplished, I stopped at a sandwich shop. Without fully reading the menu, I ordered a turkey and avocado wrap with bacon, tomato, and extra mayo. The cashier joked, "Your funeral?" And for the first time in days, I laughed. "That's not what's going to liquidate me," I said, amused by the irony. After grabbing my food, I left a generous tip and found a bench to eat while drafting my pitch. My email to the students was straightforward. I explained the project: a collage of people hugging, older adults embracing younger ones, athletes hugging disabled individuals, bikers and hippies, men and women in every combination. The tagline would read, "Nothing free gives so much to another person. Give it as a gift today." The design had to be scalable and suitable for a billboard. By the time I contacted an ad agency for billboard space, 5 of the students had already responded with quotes. I quickly agreed to their rates and secured 3 billboard locations in my target neighborhood, negotiating for reasonable turnaround times. The final 2 offers arrived shortly after, and I accepted them as well. The next day, I received 6 sample designs. I approved them all, paying the students 50% more than they'd asked. It wasn't charity, I just didn't have a reason to hold on to the money. The designs I liked best earned their creators an additional commission for a second project. 2 days later, I sat in my car in a parking lot, munching on a chocolate chip cookie and sipping cold milk. The nostalgia for childhood comfort foods hit hard. My billboard was installed within hours, a vibrant display of hugs and the cheerful tagline. Watching the team work, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and melancholy. As they finished, I stepped out of the car and approached one of the workers. Watching the crew finish the billboard installation, I was struck by how quickly they worked. I'd assumed installing something like that would be a lengthy project, but the wiry man leading the team explained it came in pre-assembled strips. After some back and forth, I struck a deal: $2,000 per worker and $2,500 for him if they agreed to help with future projects. I paid extra to have everything ready within 24 hours. Meanwhile, Molly texted twice, letting me know she was home and asking where I was. I ignored her. If she involved the kids and they called, I'd have to explain over the phone what I planned to say in person. Her lack of concern worked in my favor. 48 hours later, the new billboard went up 3 blocks from Arnold Frost's office. It displayed a photo of him kissing Molly, accompanied by the caption, "Dr. Arnold Frost is my wife's chiropractor. He treats more than just her back." The ad agency assured me it couldn't be traced back to me, but I didn't care. Knowing I was dying made me fearless. The fallout came quickly. By lunchtime, the agency called to report a problem with the billboard. Playing the outraged client, I demanded immediate action. They promised to remove the image that evening and restore the original in 2 days. I repeated the stunt at another location near Frost's office. After the 3rd billboard, the agency terminated my contract. The story spread across social media and even hit local news, driving traffic to a website I'd set up for the stunt. Molly bombarded me with calls and messages, acting as though she cared, but I ignored her. The house she'd insisted we needed, an ostentatious mansion in the best neighborhood, had been a gift from my parents, sold to me for next to nothing. I had taken out a massive mortgage on it, knowing full well what I was doing. Liquidating assets and cutting ties wasn't just petty, it was strategic. Friday evening, I met Scott Billings for dinner. He was a colleague in the same field, and I hoped to get his perspective on selling my company. He surprised me by bringing his girlfriend, Liz Armaguido, a high-powered lawyer with a reputation for being unrelenting. Scott also surprised me with a hug. We'd never been close enough for gestures like that. As we ate, Scott broached the subject everyone in town seemed to know about: the billboards. He asked if I was seeing anyone for support, hinting that I should. I admitted I hadn't, though I appreciated his concern. Then he introduced me to Liz, who wasted no time addressing the chaos I'd created. Liz explained that Frost was now facing ethical charges, losing patients, and being pushed out of his practice. She predicted he'd try to sue me but seemed unconcerned. Offering to help, she laid out her terms. I'd cover her expenses, but she wouldn't charge a fee. She even offered to investigate Frost further, confident she could uncover more dirt. When I asked why she was willing to help a stranger, Liz dropped her smile and admitted to past regrets about not stepping in to help someone close to her. She didn't want to make the same mistake twice. Besides, she said, Frost was a scumbag, and taking him down was its own reward. Her honesty caught me off guard, but I accepted the offer. In a matter of days, I'd not only created chaos in Frost's life, but also found allies willing to stand by me. While I wasn't sure where this road would lead, one thing was certain. I wasn't done yet. That evening, I finally opened up to Scott and Liz about my diagnosis. Liz mentioned her brother-in-law's aunt, a private nurse and dietitian, and promised to share her contact information. We didn't delve into the grim reality that I'd eventually need round-the-clock care, but the thought lingered. The next morning, I made the hour-long drive to my daughter Amber's house. She had moved closer last year, something that now felt like an incredible blessing. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw William's car already there. Sitting in my car, I tried to gather the strength to face them. I dreaded hurting my children, but knew I had no choice. They had to know both the truth about my health and about Molly. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my laptop and went inside. Amber and William were waiting, their expressions somber. After hugging them tightly, I sat them down and began, stumbling through an apology for having to burden them with this. I told them about Molly's infidelity first, starting with the basics. She was seeing a man she dated before our marriage, a chiropractor who had recently moved back to town. Their initial reactions wavered between disbelief and denial. I showed them the investigators' reports, and Amber insisted on seeing the photos. William refused, but watched her face as she scrolled through the images. When tears rolled down her cheeks, the reality hit both of them hard. I hugged Amber as she cried, and then braced myself for the next revelation. "There's more," I began, trying to steady my voice. "I didn't want to do this all at once, but I don't have a choice. I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors say I have about 6 months." Their grief over Molly was quickly overshadowed by the devastating news about my health. They reacted as I had, refusing to accept it, clinging to the hope of a mistake, a second opinion, or a miracle treatment. Drawing on ECAM's advice, I remained calm and let them process everything. They threw out suggestions, desperate for a solution, but I gently redirected the conversation, reminding them to take time to absorb it all. William seemed especially shaken, struggling to express himself. While Amber was likely to confront Molly directly, I knew William would withdraw, bottling his emotions as he always had. Later, he disappeared onto the porch with a beer, staring into the distance. When he returned, his eyes were red, and he silently hugged me and Amber before retreating for another drink. In that moment, I realized he had effectively lost both parents in one day. Wanting to salvage some sense of normalcy, I suggested we go out for dinner at the best restaurant in Colorado Springs. Amber agreed to find a place, and I planned to stay in her guest room for the night. I asked them not to mention my visit to Molly, and joked they could look up the Billboard chiropractor online for some added context. They nodded, managing faint smiles, and I drifted into an exhausted sleep. When Amber woke me hours later, her hand on my cheek, she looked worried. I felt feverish and groggy, brushing off her concerns with a half-mumbled suggestion to postpone dinner. She offered to take me to the hospital, but I reassured her it was nothing more than fatigue. William sat silently in a chair nearby, watching me, his concern evident. Amber kissed my forehead, her tears returning as she whispered, "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, sweetheart," I murmured before drifting off again. The burst of energy I'd been riding for days was gone, replaced by an overwhelming weariness. My resolve to make the most of my time hadn't wavered, but the toll of my circumstances was becoming harder to ignore. I woke up drained, but determined not to let it show in front of Amber and William. We had breakfast together at the cafeteria, where I made 2 trips through the line but barely touched my food. Despite feeling physically worse, emotionally I was buoyed by their presence. Still, I couldn't shake the guilt. I was leaning on them too much, drawing strength from their energy while watching it take a toll on them. Later, I took my laptop and coffee onto Amber's porch, knowing I couldn't put off dealing with my broader circle any longer. Since discovering Molly's betrayal, I'd withdrawn from nearly everyone except my kids and immediate business matters. My inbox overflowed with 274 unread emails, even after the spam filter. I deleted all of Molly's messages, 23 in total, and finally blocked her address. It was petty, but it felt satisfying. I crafted a brief response to send to distant relatives and acquaintances. It explained Molly's affair, confirmed I had evidence, and shared my diagnosis. I assured them their care was appreciated, but emphasized that my remaining time would be devoted to Amber and William. For close friends, I took more care, answering specific questions. The process took hours, but by the end, I felt a sense of closure. That evening, we went to one of the best restaurants in Colorado Springs. There were laughs, good food, and inevitable quiet moments of reflection. William flew home on Monday, while I stayed with Amber a few more days to finalize plans for a new chapter. I found and signed a lease on a small apartment and moved in the following weekend. Meanwhile, Liz had evidently shaken Frost and his lawyers. Their threats stopped, and I never heard from them again. She also introduced me to her brother-in-law's aunt, Beth, a private nurse with decades of experience. I hired her on the spot, trusting her preparation and expertise. By then, the sale of my company was finalized, and I'd secured a mortgage for the house. Life settled into a rhythm. I flew to visit William weekly, staying a day or two at his place, and he'd return the favor by flying to Pueblo. I reconnected with friends, had a few lunches with Liz and Scott, and even attended a Poplin family jug band concert. The days were filled with visits from relatives and old friends who came to say goodbye, though no one ever said it aloud. There were tears, hugs, and promises to look after my kids. As my health declined, I leaned heavily on Amber, William, and Ecom, my psychiatrist friend. They were my anchors. Molly, however, was shut out completely. I changed my phone number, ensured my children wouldn't share my contact information with her, and even hired a private investigator when I suspected she might retaliate. She appeared at my favorite bookstore and restaurants, but never seemed to notice me. Ecam eventually confronted me about Molly. He revealed that she had been to his office multiple times, even showing up at his home, desperate and broken. He referred her to a colleague, worried about her mental health. "You've succeeded in punishing her, Gordon," he said bluntly. "She's a wreck. I'm concerned about her well-being." I offered a detached apology, but didn't waver in my position. "I don't want you dragged into this, and I'm not going to see her." Ecom pressed further. "What about for your kids? They'll still have their mother when you're gone, whether you like it or not. If reconciling even slightly could help them, wouldn't it be worth considering?" He was right, and we both knew it. His words struck a chord, but I wasn't ready to admit it. "I'll think about it," I said finally with a reluctant smile. "For the kids." Eckham shrugged and smiled. "That's all I ask." Although I had prepaid Beth for a year of services, I refused to rely on her until absolutely necessary. Clinging to my independence, I resisted the inevitable loss of normalcy, even as worsening pain and higher medication doses made driving nearly impossible. Eventually, Beth became my driver. One evening, she dropped me off at La Fourchette de Massy for dinner with Amber and William before heading off to shop for her grandnephews. She adored them and spoke of them often. A teenage violin prodigy, Shannon, and two younger boys, one a toddler, the other just a baby. By the time I reached the table, my children were already seated. We enjoyed a pleasant meal, talking about their careers and lives. As dessert arrived, I broached a difficult topic. "Does my lack of contact with your mother make things harder for you?" I asked. Amber set her fork down and replied evenly, "Not really. She calls once a week, but I hang up if she mentions you. She doesn't try often." William, preoccupied with his dessert, shrugged after a pause. "It doesn't matter to me. I haven't talked to her, and I don't plan to. She can't stalk or pressure me anymore." "Is she still stalking you?" I pressed. He nodded. "I had to switch parishes. She hasn't been to church in years, but she showed up last week." A wave of emotional exhaustion swept over me. As parents, Molly and I were supposed to lighten our children's burdens, not add to them. I sighed. "When I'm gone, will it be hard for you to move forward with her? Would it help if I contacted her again?" Amber didn't hesitate. "No, Dad, if we're going to rebuild any relationship, it'll take time. That's not happening in the next few months." William leaned forward, pushing his plate aside. "I can't believe that selfish woman is my mother. You're dying, and she still makes it about herself. Forget her." Furious, he threw cash on the table to cover the bill and stormed outside. We found him sitting by the pond outside the restaurant, staring at the water. "Are you okay?" I asked gently. Startled, he looked up. "Yeah, just upset. She abandoned us, and now she wants to swoop back in before it's too late. It's always about her." Beth returned to pick me up. I hugged Amber and William goodbye and climbed into the car, her nurse's intuition picking up on my weariness. You look pale. Are you all right? Physically, not bad, I replied. Thanks, Beth. Over the next few weeks, I focused on securing my children's futures. I paid off their debts, bought William a house near his condo, and purchased Amber an investment property. I established education funds for my future grandchildren and cleared the loans for Ecom's children. Visualizing my financial efforts like a telethon marker, I worked relentlessly to spend every dollar to ensure Molly would be left with nothing. Within 60 days, I finalized the sale of my company. Employees received generous bonuses, and the agreement guaranteed their jobs for 2 years. I remained an absentee owner, letting the team handle operations. By the third month, Beth moved in, taking charge of my care as I sought palliative support, refusing treatments that would prolong my life at the expense of my remaining quality time. Occasionally, Beth claimed she needed to babysit her grandnephews. I knew it was an excuse. She could see how much their visits brightened my spirits. One afternoon, Ethan, the older boy, brought a toy dump truck and we played on the floor for hours. He bossed me around sweetly, making sure I filled the truck when instructed. His younger brother, too small for cookies, watched as Ethan insisted I share 3 with him before he would eat his own. The joy they brought reminded me of William's childhood, filling the apartment with warmth and laughter. Even as my strength waned, moments like these reminded me that I could still find light in the time I had left. The following week, William excitedly shared news about a new addition to his family, a dog they named Captain Thor. Ethan explained that the boys couldn't settle on a favorite superhero, so they combined names. More likely, Ethan just liked the sound of Captain Thor, which admittedly had a certain charm. A few days later, I spoke to Amber about getting a dog. I'd already found one named Sparky, though the boys had suggested the name Iron Hulk. Sparky seemed like a better fit. He was from a rescue, not a purebred litter as I initially joked, but he was intelligent, affectionate, and irresistible. I sent Amber a video of Sparky performing simple tricks, confident she'd fall in love with him just as I had. She planned to meet him the next day, and it was clear she was already smitten. Sparky quickly became part of my routine, though Beth handled much of his care, taking him for walks and cleaning up after him. He brought an undeniable warmth to the house. Each night, Sparky would sneak onto my pillow, staring at me until I woke. This led to an immediate purchase of halitosis treats, but his companionship made it worthwhile. Amber adored Sparky, and if not for my firm protests, might have taken him home. Even as these small joys lifted my spirits, the complexities of my situation weighed heavily. I felt a mix of sadness, fear, and an odd sense of peace. Ecam played a crucial role in that equilibrium, often standing by me during difficult moments. When we visited a priest, I half expected him to steer the conversation toward forgiveness, but he didn't. Instead, he simply remained present, a true friend when I needed it most. Music offered another kind of solace. Shannon Poplin's classical violin performances became a source of profound comfort. Attending her concerts with Beth, I often closed my eyes and let the music carry me away from pain and fear. Shannon and her father frequently performed for charity, donating any honorariums to causes like the Greater Pueblo Wish Fulfillment Foundation. One day, when Beth brought her grandnephews for a visit, I asked her to invite Shannon as well. While the boys played, I spoke privately with Shannon. I expressed my admiration for her work and the impact her music had on me. Her performances, I told her, made my fears disappear and replaced them with a sense of peace. I asked if she would consider playing at my funeral and memorial service, offering a $150,000 donation to Make-A-Wish in her honor. Shannon, shy but moved, agreed, her emotions spilling over into tears. As she composed herself, Sparky did his best to cheer her up, curling up next to her on the couch and trying to lick her face. Later, as her father came to pick up the boys, Shannon hugged me tightly, her gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. Beth watched from across the room, her expression one of quiet understanding. These moments, however fleeting, reminded me that even in the midst of uncertainty and pain, there was beauty to be found in connection, kindness, and shared humanity. The acknowledgement I received for supporting Shannon left me uneasy. While I appreciated the gratitude, I was never comfortable with praise. Shannon often heard compliments about her talent, but this time was different. It resonated with her. She understood the gravity of what I'd asked and the emotional depth behind my words. Beth later explained that Shannon and Ethan frequently connected with veterans, making her empathetic beyond her years. Though performing for the grieving might not be something she enjoyed, Shannon grasped its significance. The impact I'd made on her was clear, but I brushed it off, uncomfortable with being placed on a pedestal. Meanwhile, I continued managing my affairs. I had set up a college fund for Shannon and her brothers and created an annuity for Beth, ensuring she'd be taken care of after I was gone. However, despite my efforts to spend and redistribute my assets, the sale of the company caused my finances to grow instead of deplete. My focus shifted to ensuring Molly would have no access to anything I left behind. I knew Ecom would disapprove, though his judgment only existed in my mind. Still, I was resolute. She would receive nothing. Frost could shoulder her materialistic lifestyle if he wanted. After consulting with financial experts, I devised an intricate plan. I enlisted multiple law firms in London, New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, each tasked with securing specific assets for my children years after my death. Gold coins, artwork, and stamp collections were distributed among them, ensuring my kids could sell or keep these valuables as they saw fit. Though the process eroded a portion of my wealth, I didn't care. If it worked, my children would be secure for life. If Molly somehow found a loophole, I joked to myself that I'd return to haunt her. Most of the mutual friends Molly and I had as a couple had distanced themselves from her, but a few tried to mediate. They described her as distraught, unwilling to eat, and spiraling into isolation. They worried for her safety and urged me to meet with her. Reluctantly, I agreed, on the condition that I controlled the terms. Using a prepaid burner phone, I arranged a meeting at the cemetery bench near my future grave. The irony of the cold, rainy day wasn't lost on me, and the thought of Molly surrounded by reminders of death gave me grim satisfaction. I didn't show up. Later that evening, I texted her, fabricating a reason for my absence. I claimed a health scare had landed me in the hospital and offered to reschedule. Molly responded promptly, apologetic and willing to meet whenever it suited me. Days later, I arranged to meet her at the playground where we'd taken the kids years ago. Again, I canceled at the last minute, citing exhaustion. Each time, Molly's tone remained accommodating, but I avoided committing to anything. I continued this pattern, eventually suggesting a meeting at an Indian restaurant that now stood where I'd once proposed to her. When the time came, I sent another excuse, this time joking that aliens had abducted me. Molly didn't respond, and I felt a flicker of satisfaction. I had less than 90 days left, and even as my body failed me, I still found ways to assert control over what little remained. Physically, I was deteriorating. Despite avoiding chemotherapy, I lost my hair, and my weight plummeted. At one point, I briefly reached my ideal weight, only to drop further, unable to stabilize. Amber, determined to help, began bringing me marijuana in every form imaginable. Brownies, gummies, and joints appeared regularly in my apartment. The cannabis eased my pain and reignited my appetite, but the exhaustion remained relentless. I slept up to 14 hours a day, cutting into the time I'd hoped to spend with those I loved. My dreams were haunted by Molly. Memories blurred together. Christmas mornings and Disney trips merged with the laughter of my children. Birthdays played out in my subconscious, with Molly always by my side. I could feel her presence, her warmth as she leaned against me, her perfume faint in the background as we watched William open presents, or Amber glued to the television. Waking from these dreams left me disoriented, longing for the past. And every morning, the first thing I saw was Sparky's warm brown eyes gazing at me with unwavering love, accompanied by the unmistakable attack of hot, smelly dog breath. With $1,738,456 left to my name, I found it increasingly difficult not to dwell on the impending end of my life. Yet, when I managed to be objective, I realized how fortunate I had been. My parents, though taken too soon, loved me deeply and left me with wealth and a flourishing business. They had expanded what they'd inherited, and I'd carried that legacy further. Throughout my life, I'd always had enough love, comfort, food, and security. Of course, there were moments when enough didn't feel sufficient. More time, more money, or even more children might have enriched my life. But it would be dishonest to say I ever truly suffered. Now, as the end loomed, I could look back on years of privilege, 2 children I adored, and friends who stood by me. Despite the bitterness surrounding Molly, it felt ungrateful not to recognize the blessings in my life. Determined to leave something meaningful behind, I bought a large house near Woking Sticks Manor, a foreclosure left unfinished when the previous owners ran out of funds. They'd intended to convert it into housing for Colorado State University students. I financed the remaining renovations and dedicated myself to overseeing the project, ensuring every detail was handled promptly. The work consumed my remaining energy, but it gave me purpose. As the renovations neared completion, William began taking long weekends to help, flying in every Monday or Friday. His presence made an enormous difference. During this time, we also found the perfect candidate to run a veteran's home I'd envisioned. A 52-year-old widower named Fred Schlott, who is both a veteran and a social worker, agreed to manage the house. I prepaid his salary for 4 years, placing the funds in a trust managed by William and Amber. To sustain the house long-term, I reached out to old friends and colleagues, leveraging every connection to rally support for homeless veterans. Their plight had always been a stain on the soul of our nation, and this project was my way of addressing it. The renovations took 4 weeks, and though I struggled with mobility and fatigue, I attended the celebratory event. The Poplin family jug band played, music I pretended to enjoy, and the local media covered the opening. As I prepared to leave, I saw Molly across the street watching. She looked terrible. I leaned against the car, letting its frame support me, and stared back at her. Neither of us spoke, and after a long moment, I asked Beth to drive me home. Her tear-streaked face stayed with me, haunting my thoughts, even as I tried to dismiss it. True to my doctor's prognosis, my health rapidly declined as I neared the 6-month mark. Amber moved into the guest room, William slept on the couch, and Ethan sent videos of the boys instead of visiting in person. Sometimes I thought I heard Shannon's violin playing in the apartment, but it was likely a mix of medication and dreams. Sparky, my loyal dog, refused to leave my side. Too large to fit in the wheelchair, he leaned against it, resting his head in my lap, or burrowing into the blankets I constantly needed. Fatigue took over my days, making long periods of wakefulness impossible. Despite my physical decline, I noticed Amber and Beth acting strangely. They often walked Sparky multiple times, but only to the edge of the parking lot, 100 yards away. They would glance out the window, whispering in hushed tones. It happened so frequently that it began to irritate me. William never participated, so I waited until he went grocery shopping to confront them. I told Amber and Beth they could let Molly in under strict conditions. She was to follow my instructions exactly and leave immediately afterward. Their stunned faces nearly made me laugh, though I lacked the strength. I reminded Amber of her role, stressing that if Molly didn't comply, she'd have to escort her out. Amber agreed, reluctantly heading for the door. She returned minutes later, looking uneasy. Amber explained that Molly was outside, struggling to compose herself. She described her mother as being in a terrible state and pleaded with me not to be cruel, even if Molly deserved little compassion. Her words gave me pause, but I remained resolute. I had agreed to this meeting for a reason, and it was time to face whatever came next. A soft knock interrupted the silence before the door creaked open. Molly stepped inside, and though she might have hated the description, she looked utterly worn. Her clothes hung loosely on her now frail frame, her hair was unkempt, and she seemed as drained as I felt. I greeted her simply, but with a hint of sharpness. She attempted to speak, her voice cracking as she started to form words. I cut her off immediately, establishing the boundaries I needed. There would be no apologies, no explanations, and absolutely no mention of Frost or her affair. The moment she broke those rules, I told her, the conversation would be over. When she started to protest, I stopped her again. My patience was razor thin and my strength waning, but I made it clear. Any attempt to excuse or explain her actions would result in her immediate dismissal. She quickly backtracked, agreeing to the terms and stammering another hollow apology. Turning back to Sparky, who wagged his tail with comforting loyalty, I stroked his head to ground myself before continuing. I told Molly the truth, that so much of what once mattered no longer did. But if there was any piece of the woman she used to be, any fragment of the devoted wife and mother she had been, that part would want forgiveness. I couldn't offer it now, though I promised to try, whether in this life or the next. Fighting through my mounting fatigue and the weight of the moment, I delivered my final request. I asked her to focus on our children. No matter how much they rejected or resented her, she needed to be there for them. She needed to be the mother she once was when they were small. And if she ever became a grandmother, she would have to carry both my role and hers. I wouldn't be there, but she would. By the time I finished, Molly was crying, and I felt the sting of tears threatening to follow. She looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew, aged beyond her years. I dismissed her, feeling too weak to continue. She paused at the door, glancing back at me. "I love you, Gordon," she said through tears. "I'll never stop being sorry. Even if you can forgive me someday, I know I never will." With that, she left, and I knew it would be the last time I saw her. Strangely, I felt at peace with it. In those final days, I began to see my life not as a series of disconnected moments, but as a complete narrative. It had been a good life, filled with love, purpose, and even gratitude in the last 6 months. Despite the pain and loss, I had found meaning and closure. When the end came, it was quiet. Ecom sat in the corner, murmuring a prayer, while Amber and William stood at my side. Amber's hand held mine, grounding me in my last moments. Sparky, my steadfast iron hulk, lay close, his head resting against me. My breathing became shallow, but there was no pain, only peace. I offered a final prayer for my family and friends, smiling as I drifted toward the unknown. The soft strains of a violin filled the air, perhaps real, perhaps imagined, and a whisper reached me in the stillness. I wasn't sure who spoke, but I believed it was Amber. Her words were a perfect parting gift, resonating with love and finality. I love you.